The rate of adoption around crypto from the institutional players just continues to accelerate more and more and more. And this is something that I do think everyone should remain focused on, because what we are witnessing here is the convergence in a huge way. And it's actually happening in a very fast way as well. Even JP Morgan is now saying that DeFi and TradFi are converging fast, citing pilots with Chainlink and even Base. Now, we do know that JP Morgan did announce JPMD, their tokenized deposit, with Base. Obviously, that will be connected with Chainlink as well. But it's crazy to see what's happening around crypto today compared to just a few years back. Back in 2021, for an example, what were we hearing? Well, we were hearing from all of the big banks that crypto was bad. Stay away from crypto. Don't touch crypto. Nowadays, they are all embracing it. And what's crazy about that is even when they were telling us that crypto was bad and you shouldn't touch it, they were already here. That's the biggest problem, is a lot of people think that like JP Morgan and these big banks are still just like fresh into crypto. No, they've had private blockchain initiatives, private POCs for years now. And I think that a good example of this is even utilizing Ripple, right? Like Ripple has had POCs with so many big players utilizing XRP and the XRPL for a very long time, since going all the way back to like 2015, 2016. But regardless of that, the main focus here is that institutional adoption just continues to heat up. And when we think about some of these great companies like Ripple that are utilizing XRP and the XRPL, what have we been hearing about for years? Well, we've been hearing about how crypto adoption is going to continue to heat up, and we're going to see all of this big, movement from the institutional players. Even recently, back on June 24th, for an example, Ripple X Dev did put out a great post regarding Apex 2025, which was a huge event for XRP. It marked a major turning point for institutional adoption on the XRP ledger. From tokenized treasuries to global stablecoins, real-world finance is no longer hypothetical. It's being built now on the XRPL. Now, of course, they did recap this with all of the great updates happening around XRP and the XRPL, and all of the great developments even happening through some of the amendments that they were pushing, like MPTs, permission decks, credentials, all that kind of stuff. But the main thing that I'm actually focused on whenever it comes to institutional adoption is how do we actually get to that point, right? Because again, there's still a few things that have been unanswered, which is, of course, interoperability. And this is where I do start to really kind of look at the players in this space that are trying to make sure that this is solved. Now, a lot of people say Chainlink immediately, right off the rip. Oh, Chainlink's working with Swift. They're working with this player. They're working with that player. And don't get me wrong, Chainlink is great. We've talked about it in the past. In fact, we've addressed, Quant, for an example, QNT, and even Chainlink. We've addressed both of them together, and we've talked about what's different about them. We've talked about the specific PDF files that have been talking about oracles compared to things like Overledger, for an example. And again, it really kind of goes back to the idea that Quant and what Quant has built is very similar to Chainlink, sure, on what Chainlink is doing, but it also has major differences, specifically security, which is a huge selling point for major institutional players. But on top of this post from RippleX, we also got this, which was the big unlock for institutional DeFi on the XRP ledger, which was the permission DEX, which they did mention here even at Apex. That is that compliant secondary market. This is going to enable everything around institutional players with DeFi use cases, which means tokenized RWAs, stablecoins, all of those great things that we've been talking about are now going to be able to be tapped in to specific use cases around the DEX, which is just trading and swapping. Then we also think about, the Forex market, which they do talk about KYC gated FX swaps. I mean, this just opens up so much for the institutional players, but still, we need to be able to connect the XRP ledger to the traditional financial systems. And we're going to talk about that because it's not just as easy as 1, 2, 3 utilizing, the Ripple network. But what about Hedera? Because Hedera has also been accelerating institutional grade adoption. They've been tapped in with enterprise players, for an example. Even recently, we've talked about this because this goes back to like roughly 2024 as well. The Mika Alliance was announced back in 2024. Then throughout 2025, we saw additional players join the Mika Alliance. XDC was one of them. We've talked about Hedera, we've talked about XRP, we've talked about XDC as well. Listen, these are great utility-based networks. They have been focused on institutional adoption. They've been talking about enterprise adoption forever now. And so has XLM. And like I said, adoption is here. It's already happening, right? We see big players tapping into the XRP ledger all the time. We see big players tapping into Hedera all the time, even XDC, and even Stellar, right? Franklin Templeton, Wisdom Tree, ABN AMRO. These are players that are already tokenizing on Stellar. But the main thing here that I want you guys to understand is that the network is being tokenized on, right? We could even see that through like Securitize, for an example. Look at all of the issuers here. We have BlackRock, we have Securitize, tokenized Apollo, which again is another big institutional player. VanEck as well, Spice Venture Capital Fund. Like, we see the adoption here. We can track it on chain. Even when we look at Franklin Templeton, we can see all the networks that are being tapped in here. We could see it even through BlackRock. We could see all of the networks being tapped in. Then Wisdom Tree, we could see the networks. The main thing that I want you guys to understand here, okay, is that almost no one is thinking about Quant. And I think this is where a lot of people are making the big mistake, because QNT today is trading at about roughly $107. The market cap for it, fully diluted, by the way, because all the supply is out there. It just has yet to actually get updated on CoinMarketCap. I have no idea why. 1.59 billion, fully diluted value. 33% less supply than Bitcoin. I talked about it in almost every single QNT video, right? I have to mention that because the supply for QNT is extremely limited. When we think about all of this adoption happening around tokenization and even stablecoins, right? The stablecoin market is booming. 241 billion. I think it just recently hit 255 billion, but again, RWA.XYZ is actually kind of behind. If we go to the categories, let me actually just look up stablecoins real quick and go to the categories, because we have to think that, or sorry, I guess that's not allowing me to look it up. Before it did. Don't know why it's not, but if we actually go to the stablecoin market, $259 billion are tied to stablecoins right now. If we're thinking about all of this adoption happening around stablecoins and around tokenized RWAs, it's great. We love to see it. The problem is how do we connect it to everything in the traditional system? Well, enter Quant, specifically the layer 2.5 that they announced. We see here from Quant, why did we build a layer 2.5? Institutions want public blockchain access. We see that, right? We look at what's happening around XRP, around Hedera, around Stellar, around XDC. We see that the institutions want public blockchain access. But today's infrastructure creates compliance and interoperability barriers. Quant Fusion introduces a new architecture, a multi-ledger rollup that lets assets and contracts move natively across chains. No bridges, no wrapped tokens, no compliance trade-offs. Even Gilbert Verdian did say this. He said institutions are eager to embrace blockchain, but existing infrastructures often force them into a dilemma. Engage with public blockchains and face compliance challenges, or stick to permission networks and miss out on broader ecosystem liquidity. Quant's latest blog introduces Layer 2.5, a novel approach designed to bridge this gap. Multi-ledger rollups for seamless interoperability across multiple blockchains, compliance-first architecture allowing institutions to select trusted validators, and then privacy-preserving smart contracts that don't compromise on access to public liquidity. This isn't just another scaling solution. It's a reimagined infrastructure tailored for institutional needs. Dive into the full article around this. Now, I have that article open over here. But first, I want you guys to understand how all of this really gets connected. On the bottom there around blockchains, you could add Stellar, XRP, you could add any major, blockchain network to this. But then you look at all of the other things that are tied to the Overledger operating system, which, by the way, Fusion is also tied to this. You have banking APIs, payment APIs, all of that stuff. We've been using this image forever now because it's extremely hard to really kind of just say, this is exactly how it works. A lot of people are just not going to understand it. The best way to look at this is think about your computer or think about your phone, right? Whether you're running on iOS or Android, it doesn't matter, right? You have that underlying operating system. that operating system connects you to the banking apps, to the gaming apps, to the social media apps. You could use Google, you could do all this great stuff on that phone, but you don't get access to those apps. And the way that you can look at this is Quant is the operating system. The apps are the networks, XRP, Hedera, XDC, all that kind of stuff. And then the users or even the developers or even the institutional players can build their own apps within those apps. If I lost you, I do apologize, but that is the best way that I can describe what Quant is doing here. They're building an operating system that will live on pretty much any of these devices. We could use, instead of just devices, we could use, public networks, right? We have these networks that are launched by institutional players, by enterprises, by companies. Those apps can be connected to blockchains. They can be connected to pretty much any blockchain network. Any blockchain network could be easily tapped in here. But all of this would be tied back to the Overledger network, the Overledger operating system. And Fusion is just another piece of this. And we have here from July 3rd, why institutions need layer 2.5 and why we built it. The blockchain infrastructure and interoperability problem have been hiding in plain sight while DeFi exploded and retail adoption soared. Institutional players have been limited to the sidelines, not by choice, but by regulatory necessity. The very features that make public blockchains powerful also make them problematic for regulated entities. We've spent years watching this unfold. Banks, asset managers, and enterprises want the reach and liquidity of public chains, but they can't stomach the compliance risk. They need to know where their transactions are processed, who's validating them, and how to maintain privacy without sacrificing interoperability. Today, we're introducing Quant Fusion, a new way to solve institutional interoperability and the first layer 2.5 network built specifically to solve these institutional roadblocks while supercharging DeFi capabilities. The problem everyone's been dancing around, let's be direct about what's broken. Current blockchain architecture forces institutions into impossible choices. Use layer 1 directly, you're exposed to unknown validators and potentially sanctioned jurisdictions. Your transactions are completely public. You can't safely integrate internal security and key management systems with external blockchains. Your compliance team will have nightmares. Stick to permission networks. You're isolated from the broader ecosystem, liquidity is limited, and you're essentially rebuilding the walled gardens blockchain was supposed to eliminate. Try existing layer 2s. You're still tied to a single chain, dependent on clunky bridges, and facing the same fundamental compliance issues. None of these work for serious institutional deployment, and frankly, they limit what's possible for DeFi protocols too. Enter layer 2.5, a different approach. Fusion isn't just another scaling solution. It's a patented multi-chain rollup network that operates across multiple layer 1 blockchains simultaneously. Think of it as a horizontal infrastructure rather than vertical scaling. Here's what makes it different. The multi-ledger design, which we talked about, the compliance first architecture, which we talked about, privacy without isolation, we talked about, enterprise grade security. Now, this is one thing that I want you guys to understand. Built-in identity management, granular access controls, and seamless integration with existing enterprise systems. So it has that seamless integration. For the first time, extend your enterprise security perimeter to extend to public blockchains. Real use cases, real solutions. Consider a regulated institution that needs to settle tokenized assets across Ethereum and Avalanche while maintaining full control over validator jurisdiction. Today, this requires complex bridge arrangements, wrapped tokens, and significant counterparty risk. With Fusion, its native interoperability, assets move seamlessly across chains through the layer 2.5 network, settled by trusted nodes in approved jurisdictions. Or take a DeFi protocol wanting to tap liquidity across multiple chains without forcing users through bridge after bridge. Fusion enables true cross-chain applications where assets and logic flow naturally between networks. The technology behind it, at its core, is Overledger, right? The platform and our multi-ledger rollup technology. This isn't theoretical. It's built on years of enterprise blockchain deployment and real-time or real-world usage. The network is secured by QNT, which serves as both the native token and the staking mechanism for trusted nodes. Node operators stake QNT to participate in transaction processing and earn rewards based on network activity. Key features, well, bring your node capabilities for ultimate control, granular API permissions for organizational access management, flexible connector architecture for easy blockchain integration, cross-organizational permission frameworks for complex enterprise workflows. And then why now? Well, the timing isn't coincidental. After years of permission DLT experiments, institutions are ready to move towards public blockchain infrastructure, but only with the right architecture in place. DeFi has proven the commercial value of on-chain operations. Tokenized assets are moving from experiment to reality. The infrastructure gap between institutional requirements and public blockchain capabilities has never been more obvious or more solvable. So that's why we look at Fusion. It launches in phases starting in June of 2025. So it already started. The initial release includes core layer 2.5 functionality in the trusted node program, with expanded features rolling out progressively. This isn't a closed ecosystem. We're building open infrastructure designed to support the entire blockchain industry's evolution towards institutional adoption. So everything here, DeFi protocols, public blockchains, all of them can now be tied into this, which means institutional players now have a choice on what networks they want to tap into. Quant is enabling all of this at scale. The networks are already being utilized, right? They're already being adopted. XRP is being adopted, Stellar's being adopted, Hedera is being adopted, XDC is being adopted. All of these players are being adopted. All of these networks are being adopted. They're being utilized. But the problem is that we want to see these networks tied to traditional systems. We want to bridge the gap completely, and Quant is solving this. So Quant is enabling what we already are starting to see moving on chain. They are enabling this at massive scale. Because again, a lot of what we see in crypto right now is just the test phase. In order to get to trillion, in order for all of this to scale in a huge way, we need this layer 2.5 from Quant. It's so crucial, especially at a time where, yeah, institutional players want to utilize public blockchains. What Quant is doing here is extremely bullish, but it's not just extremely bullish for QNT. It's bullish for all of these great networks that are focused on institutional grade adoption and even enterprise grade adoption. The future for crypto is so bullish. But we don't get there without players like Quant continuing to innovate and continuing to build extremely revolutionary tech like this. So with that being said, if you are holding utility-based projects, I do think your portfolio should have a little bit of QNT in it. I really do. And if you don't want to, don't add it. But I do think that in a few years from now, we will look back and we will say that Quant was such an obvious choice. So with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, definitely leave a like, subscribe, turn notifications on because more free content. You guys are more than welcome to follow me on Twitter and join the free Discord on the description below. And with that being said, guys, thanks for watching. Peace out.